All right, we're live. Okay, that was an awesome day. Thanks, Patrick, for that great final call or final talk of the day. Super interesting to see how all these different trends are starting to emerge. Obviously, everyone's kind of on different parts of this journey. Some people are doing like really deep implementation, having like really massive impacts today, but they're constantly changing or redefining how their agents work, how their context works, how the infrastructure works. And I still think we're kind of in this phase where the primitives are rock solid. And it feels like the trends that are emerging right now are more in the realm of optimization. So that kind of brings up a question, which I wanted to kind of field to you, Philip. What was like the most interesting optimization that you saw today?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I feel like let's pull up the slides actually. So, all right. So I think there were so many optimizations that folks are talking about that were interesting because, again, if we go back to this concept of the factory, like your job basically now is to continuously optimize the system as you go. You don't like one shot this factory and it's just like going. You like continuously look at like where are new bottlenecks emerging, where do you need to intervene, what do you need to fine tune, etc. And then increasingly also have the agents do that yourself. So I think that's just like the general theme that increasingly engineering is just about like optimizing the system, the factory behind it. What stood out to me is Roger's call from Cloudflare, where he was talking about the engineering codex. So that to me, again, just stresses the importance of the harness and how you can codify your standards, right, into like a machine readable format. And if you think back about the bottlenecks we talked about in the keynote earlier today, code generation is like kind of solved. Then you had like code review as the next big bottleneck, right? And I know there's like a couple of folks that just like slapped AI review on every PR, and that created like a lot of slop there, and like people really didn't look at it, so it didn't really help for guiding the engineers' attention there. It just probably made it worse. And in the end, I think what Rajesh also called out is that it's also fundamentally a trust problem to solve for, right? Like you can't have the best AI code reviewer in the world, etc. Like if people lose trust, then it's not worth anything. So I found it quite interesting how he was talking about that, how they, like the moment that they saw the trust flipped, and because there was like basically like a codified standard behind that, and people were trusting that standard, and then in turn they could trust the agent also to follow that standard. And by objectively knowing what standards the agent has been applying, by like flagging certain things in the PR, people started trusting it and like using it more, and that then eventually like kind of released the bottleneck there. So I found that quite an interesting optimization, and it's also some one that we saw ourselves here at ONA, where we have an auto approval on. We have PR review through ONA on every PR, and we co-author, I think, 93% of our PRs with ONA, and every PR is reviewed. And that created a lot of a bottleneck, right? Because a human still needed to check. But what we've done is we enabled auto merge. Like a human still has to press the button, but there's a label that we slap onto it that the agent basically deems it to be okay to be merged. So you don't have to go as deep into these PRs. Whereas others actually, need to be more reviewed in depth by a human. And we've gone a similar route where we like really codified like what are the rules where the agent can basically say, this is small enough from scope that I can, if I have high confidence, approve this, whereas this is too big, touching too risky components, like it's a database change, for example, or it's more than 1,000 lines of code that were changed, where still a human needs to jump in. And once we've codified these things, we also saw like a massive bottleneck being removed, right? So I found that a super helpful optimization because it's essentially relieving the first big bottleneck that most people are stumbling across after figuring out code generation with agents. How about you though? Like, what did you think were the most interesting optimizations?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it was really interesting to see how, the premise of the bottleneck shifting still kind of moves around a bunch. And everyone's doing different things with how to. Everyone's doing different things trying to deal with how to alleviate those bottlenecks. It is kind of still that whack-a-mole thing that we were talking about a little bit. And it's funny to see how like self-improvement of these agents can be so substantial, and documented improvement can be so substantial, like with what Patrick was talking about, with context engineering, but also with what Xiaocheng was talking about with Genentech, right? He was talking about how the agent would constantly write its own diary every night and like write its own skills and all those things, which I thought was really cool, like a super kind of like personified way to tell the agent to self-improve. But also I feel like, over constraining is kind of becoming this new over engineering thing, where if you just slap skills on everything, it can lead to unpredictable results and increased tool costs. So like kind of balancing the context engineering work with like the skill engineering and self-improvement work is really important. Seeing how like making sure your skills are always up to date with the right architecture, knowing where the like agent needs to look to find certain types of files. Like if anything changes in your architecture and the skill becomes out of date, then the agent goes completely out of whack, right? If everything is over constrained. So there's like a really important balance to strike there, but also potentially weaving back in that self-improvement to show like, oh, if anything went wrong in this tool execution, the agent comes back with a report to say like, hey, I tried finding this file here, I couldn't find it. We probably need to make an update to the skill. Let's, ship PR that updates the skill, updates the internal architecture documentation, or maybe even better yet, you do context engineering behind that and have a living, breathing architecture file somewhere, either as like a knowledge graph or a dependency chart that your agent knows to access and how to kind of grep or like cat its way through. So I thought that was another really interesting implementation.
Yeah, I agree.
That kind of brings up the next question, right? Which is, what's it something that everyone's underestimating?
Yeah. I mean, good question. I think like one is for sure, like again, the continuous effort this takes. But I think more fundamentally, I think the speakers that we've heard, they actually have not underestimated this, but I think like the industry is underestimating it a bit. Is like going back to the foundations that you mentioned in the beginning. It's your agents. If you use background agents, if you want to build out this factory eventually, you need to have really proper dev environments for every agent. And with that, I mean, they should mimic exactly what your engineers have available, right? Like completely set up, configured, access to all of your internal tool chain. So probably like for many companies, this needs to live in your VPC in order to access all of it. Because otherwise, like you're just limiting the agent with what they can do and what the context they have available. But B, also you want those environments to be living in the cloud, because otherwise you cannot scale it, right? Like your local computer has limits. This is the false summit we've been talking about, but also from an isolation point of view, right? If you have thousands of agents in parallel running on different things, then you obviously don't want them to interfere with each other. So every agent needs to be self-contained. And then the other thing is, from a security point of view, that is also kind of the prerequisite, right? That it's like isolated and running in the cloud. So I think Stripe has figured this out, and there's others too that have figured that out that we're also hearing tomorrow from. But what they have worked on is like, even in the past, they kind of worked on this underlying layer with, I think Stripe called it dev boxes, right? Uber calls it DevBot. We will be hearing about that tomorrow. But it's like, if you figure out the underlying infrastructure that is really, really helpful and good for humans, it will be even more helpful and substantial for agents. And I think that perfectly configured dev environment that has absolutely no yak shaving around, that can just be spun up with a click, never differs from another. If you spin up several, never differs from the one that your colleague has. This is like really what's currently being underestimated.
Yeah, I've always thought of that as like you wouldn't, if you wanted an engineer to be productive on day one, you wouldn't just give them a blank Chromebook and say like, good luck, have fun. You're not just gonna throw them something extremely blank and say, figure it all out. And if you don't ship in the next 30 minutes, I'm actually going to get really mad at you and start yelling at you like you would in an agent window if it doesn't respond for 30 minutes. So I feel like, that's definitely a big piece of the puzzle. You want to be able to like onboard your agents instantaneously and make sure they're ready to rock. So that's one of the things with, you see a lot of these like cloud sandbox plays, which I think are really important and useful for certain types of engineering workflows. But like sub-second startup times aren't necessarily as important as having the environment, fully configured and provisioned. But then that brings up the next stage of this, right? Which is trust and auditability and all these other pieces of the puzzle, which I think we're going to hear a lot more about tomorrow. But being able to make sure that environment is as locked down and audited and traced as you would with a typical development environment that an engineer is using, right? I mean, Stripe had those dev boxes because they needed secure development, not because they needed agentic workflows. It just wound up being a good primitive. Exactly. And so the security kind of stemmed from that. And I think the importance of security and trust is going to be a really emergent topic in the next couple of months here.
Yeah. And to add on to that, so I think it's a really important point you raised. And right now, I feel like many people and companies too make some compromises on security just because, they want to move fast and like, give agents the benefit of the doubt, basically. But the way the agents work is like they're really persistent, right? They want to get the task done. So they will find ways to go around. They will, they reason their way through. No, very different from how a human would do that. So if there's like any rogue agent through prompt injection or whatever, like you need to be prepared for that, especially if you have like thousands running in the background and you don't watch every step. Again, like if you have to watch every step, like it kind of defeats the purpose. Like you're in the loop again, but you want to pull yourself out of the loop, right? So in order to pull yourself out of the loop, goes back to what I was saying initially, is like you need to turn that autonomy into productivity. If it's like completely autonomous, but you can't trust it, then for sure there will be like security chaos. And I think also the industry will wake up to that because there will be more incidents around that. And then everybody knows that this is really important. But most people, from what I have seen, is they rely too much on denial lists where they just like, nicely prompt the agent to not execute certain commands. And then like, of course, the agent finds their way around, executes something that is like compromised. And then, shit hits the fan basically. So I think what I found also really interesting is like, obviously we're doing a lot of work ourselves in this area, but the talk from Nono was also pretty eye-opening. But it's something you kind of need to control for that at runtime or even at the like kernel level. You have to have access to the kernel and control it there, because that's a layer in depth that the agent cannot reach, basically, right? And I think that's something that's just becoming more and more important as the industry is moving forward. So we're sure we will hear more about that.
Well, as we kind of move in to wrap things up, I just wanted to say a really quick thank you to everyone who spoke today. Really, we just want to provide a platform for the leading voices in the industry to come in and talk. And like Philip and I can talk all day, but we're not the ones getting into the weeds and building this. So thank you so much for taking the time to submit talks and come in here and do interviews and work with us. It's been really eye-opening, and I hope it's been eye-opening for everyone who is here today too. But Philip, I'll pass this back to you to get things excited for day 2.
Yes. So day 2, starting tomorrow at the same time, you'll hear us just very briefly for 5 minutes or so opening up the day. Then we'll have Harvey. So Joey, who built Spectre at Harvey, nice naming, by the way. So that AI legal platform, who weren't actually that vocal about it compared to Ramp, but they have built quite a system there. So really excited about that. We have Incident.io, and then we have 2 talks about software factories that really like go autonomously end to end, which is quite interesting. And then obviously Monzo talking more about like how do you actually roll this out in a regulated environment. So really, really great talks, including Uber. And I hope you all tune in again. If you've submitted a question that wasn't answered in the chat, we will collect all the answer responses and then like reach out via email. So we do like an async follow up with the speakers too, and provide answers. So make sure that you subscribe to our emails, and then we'll follow up with the responses there. So thanks for tuning in, and see you tomorrow.
Yeah, absolutely.
Take care.